All right, we're going to get the program underway here. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Tom O'Rourke. I'm the president of the Neponset River Regional Chamber, and we're glad you could join us tonight here at this wonderful space at Christina Event Space Center. And we got a really cool panel put together tonight. This is, I think, the 6th year we've done ChamberTalks, and people always walk out of here with a lot of great ideas and learn a lot. So hopefully you'll be the same tonight. I'm sure it will be. We got a really strong panel, and we're pleased to be joined tonight by our moderator, Rob Peters. Many of you may know Rob. He's a chamber member, has been for years, and he does a lot with small businesses in the area in many capacities, as an MC, as a DJ, as a coach. He does a lot for small business. We appreciate him joining us here tonight. And before I turn it over to him, I do just want to recognize and thank our sponsors for the program. Murphy, Hesse, Toomey, and Lehane, One Local Bank, and Rockland Trust are all sponsors tonight. So thank you for your support, all three of you. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Rob. I was going to say the bar is open. It's open for business, but it's not an open bar. Right? So that's still there, and there's still food in the back room, so help yourself as we go through the program. Restrooms are out this way. There are signs. If you head out that way, you will see signs directing you. Rob, take it away.
All right, well, thank you, Tom, and thank you to the Chamber for having me. How's everybody doing? All right, for all of you people way in the back, you're not going to be able to hear that well if you're way back there, so come on down. That's the loudest I'm going to get tonight. So, and I want to thank all of you for caring enough about your businesses to be here tonight. Our format tonight is going to be really simple. You're going to meet the people. We have had questions submitted that each of our panelists are going to answer, and we're going to go right down the road one at a time and give them an opportunity to address some really important topics that are important to you, important to me. And if we have time when we're done, we will do open question. But there's some really good things up here, and I want to introduce our panelists real quick. Julie Abilheira. I'm not going to go through their bios. You've got a little sheet with that. And quite honestly, I want to get ready to the meat and potatoes. John Hurst. By the way, it's okay to clap for them. Sorry, Julie. Let's try that again. How about we give it Julie? Christina Ruiz. Let's give her a hand. Bill Ryan. And Lisa Corrigan. All right. So, you ready? Everybody can hear everybody? We're all good? I'm going to ask you to do one more thing before we get started, just so we don't have that awkward moment. I'm going to ask you to take out your cell phone. Awesome. And before you silence it, you're going to take a selfie of our panel. I'm just kidding. You're going to please silence your cell phone, because if it does ring, if you've ever seen me host bar trivia before, I've been known to walk up to a table that is using their phone and it's ringing and actually answer the phone. I actually called out sick for some lady because her boss called. I will do that. Don't be shy. So, Julie, we're going to start with you. All right? What challenges are you facing with recruitment, and subsequently, what strategies can increase retention or mitigate turnover?
Okay. Anybody else in healthcare? So from a healthcare perspective, I'll frame it, and it's always a challenge, right? And we have a major focus on that first point of entry. So as soon as you apply and you do HR, and I'm not saying it's perfect, because we're also looking at several ways to continue to engage folks that are hired. But I think that first point of entry, that first glimpse at Brown University Health for us personally is really that first impression of who we are as an organization, as a first choice for an employer. Can everybody hear me? No. Oh, a little louder? All right. And so I think, once we are able to, from a nursing perspective, perspective, we really are hyper-focused on those 0 to 3 years, 3 to 7 years, to really make sure, because what we've seen is once we hire folks, after a couple of years, people may need to go on to different roles, whether it's within the organization, which we want to see that happen, career framework, or they're leaving our organization for a different healthcare system. So really working with the folks early on to devote time and dedication for a mentoring program, really leaning into our new employee orientation and making sure we have the right match for those new hires to be able to communicate and talk to people that are doing the same work as them so that they can go through some of the challenges that they're facing. I think people will leave for money, but when you look at the data and the literature, that's not the main reason why people leave organizations. So really trying to be that employer of choice, that safe psychological space, because healthcare is really hard. And I believe in an open door policy and how do we make sure our employees feel valued through all the hard work that they do.
So the really cool part about being a moderator is I told my panelists all one thing, that we're going to go right down the road, but I see a connection here, so we're actually going to jump around a little bit, panelists. I hope you're okay with that. And we're going to go to Lisa, because you know what, Lisa, there's a good point here that Julie just made, and that is about compensation. And compensation isn't everything. What else does matter right now?
You're right, actually, Rob, we've talked about that, and compensation isn't everything. A lot of people nowadays are looking for flexibility and a better work-life balance. So as an employer, when you find that ideal candidate that you love, that you think is awesome, it's not really just about the money. And it's 99% not just about the money. It's a total package, and that means PTO or CTO, which now some companies are calling it choice time off. It's about the work-life balance, flexibility. A lot of people are, we're all busy. We have busy lives, we have families, we have aging parents, we have obligations, and flexibility is huge. So when you have these employees or candidates that you're recruiting for, looking to hire, think about the whole package, not just the compensation. 100%.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to turn over to John. How you doing, John?
Good, thank you.
Awesome. So earlier this year, John, your organization, the Retailers Association of Massachusetts, and the National Federation of Independent Businesses, and several local chambers worked with the UMass Donahue Institute to survey small stores and restaurant employers to determine their economic competitiveness and viability today versus before COVID. Now, I can speak from experience. I watched $200,000 in convention revenue for an entertainment company disappear in 2 days. Way back when. So, John, what were the key takeaways of that study?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Rob. Look, we felt it was important to take that snapshot because, we've seen what has happened over the course of the last 5 years. You've all seen it, whether it's the dark storefronts on your main streets, stores, restaurants, and the like. The problem, and it started with COVID, but even as the pandemic got better, there was a problem that a lot of small businesses still fail, and still today, are struggling. And so we felt it was important to get a real snapshot for our public policy leaders. What is the status of small business in Massachusetts, and what is causing them problems? And how can public policy change to help their bottom lines? Because we knew, every small business needs one of two things to really prosper, right? They need higher sales and or lower costs. And our suspicion was it was going in the wrong direction. Sales were dropping and costs were rising. So we did this study through UMass Donahue Institute, which is very, respected organization, economic organization, very respected on Beacon Hill. And the outcome of this study, let me just go through a few bullets for you. It's very important, and we got to make sure that our elected officials, our government officials, really fully understand all of this. Of those surveyed, and it was about 1,000 small businesses, 76% reported that their costs were increasing faster than their sales since before COVID, since before 2019. So costs going up much faster than their sales. 49%, essentially half, reported flat or lower sales since 2019. So the cost going way up, as we suspected, but the survey clearly showed it. 44%, nearly half, reported lower profitability. 91% reported higher costs. 91%. And what were their top issues? What were their top concerns for a viable future for tomorrow? The top 5 were, number 1, cost of living for their customers. You know, small businesses almost universally serve the consumer. You know, the consumer is 70% of our economy. So we're a little bit different than a lot of other business sectors. You know, we are not only concerned about small businesses on their profitability, but we're equally concerned about how are their customers doing. The actual working families across the Commonwealth. And so that was their top concern, you know, the cost of living for their own customers. And number 2 was the cost of heating and cooling, our power bills, you know, our electricity, our gas bills. Obviously, you know, you're all customers of utilities, you've seen what's happening. Swipe fees was another issue. You know, if you go into a store or restaurant now, you almost exclusively use credit cards, right? And those costs have gone up enormously. Visa, MasterCard type of costs. You know, for a small business, it's at least 4% for any purchase. You know, right off the top that small businesses must pay to the bank. You know, as opposed to that going to their bottom line. So that's you know, cost of living for customers, cost of utilities, swipe fees, payroll taxes. If you're serving customers, you have to employ people. Payroll taxes, particularly today, unemployment insurance, and PFML, those costs are really going up, and unfortunately they're going to go up a lot more about 2 years from now. And then finally, you know, health insurance premiums. Small businesses in particular, you know, have been really hammered by health insurance premiums, much more so than large businesses, and frankly, much more so than individuals that often get subsidies through the ACA, through the connector, and the like. So the bottom line, we wanted to test, you know, what is the attitude of these small businesses, and do they feel like public policy leaders are helping them? And the answer to that was a resounding no. 73% agreed with the statement that government tends to do more to hurt small businesses than they do to help them. So, you know, in a couple of weeks, we're all going to see, you know, press events for Small Business Saturday and so forth. But the ongoing thought for a lot of these small businesses is that, well, they're with them, you know, politically expedient, but are they really with them and trying to do something really important for their bottom line, really important on the cost of doing business? So the study through UMass Donahue Institute really came to these conclusions. You know, they can't necessarily increase government. There isn't that much government can do to increase the sales for small businesses. They have to do that themselves. They have to deal with, you know, the competition here, which has grown enormously with consumer habits during COVID. You know, we've all seen that. You know, things bought right from your phone and delivered to our front doorsteps, and that's increased, unfortunately. So there's not a whole lot government can do to increase their sales. But what they can do is to do deliberate action to lower the cost of doing business. So particularly, the study came out and said they need to do something to lower the cost of health insurance, the cost of payroll taxes, and the cost of energy. Those three costs for the small businesses. And they need to do something to help out the small businesses, consumers, the residents of the Commonwealth, by lowering their taxes. And the feeling was the sales tax would be the best avenue to do that, because it is regressive and it does cut down on disposable income of the small businesses.
You know, John, you talked a little bit about taxes, and you know, all that stuff sounds great if we can find the perfect way for government to be able to do all that. And there's another one that impacts business all the way around. And Christina, I want to bring you in on this discussion about tariffs. How do tariffs typically affect the local businesses in our community?
Yeah, so if you think about the impact of a tariff, right, to your point, it generally makes the cost of any raw material or good that you're bringing in to your small business to then either transform to another product or a resale, it's going to make that much more expensive. So as those costs go up, you've got to offset that somehow. And so you start to look into the ways that you might be able to offset that. Most of those offset means, though, take a lot of energy on your part, and they take often a lot of money. Sometimes they take a lot of time, right? You can look for different supply chain sources, right? Source from a country that's not had a tariff inflicted. You can look to modify your product line. Again, the cost associated with doing that and the energy that you have to expend just to make those things happen can be quite high. And what we often see is when those costs go up, you see those dark storefronts. In a larger industry that I'm a part of, what I see is a managed cash flow. So suddenly there are restrictions on capital investments. There are restrictions on expansions. And those ultimately lead to delays in hiring. And so you can see, kind of that ripple effect across all of the economy with smaller businesses and, sort of a global conglomerate that I'm a part of.
So we've talked about a lot of the costs we endure, right? One of the things we haven't talked about yet is something that's a constant, and that's things like your utilities. So, Bill, why are utility bills here so much larger than they are in most of the rest of the country?
Yeah, it's not my fault.
I've got a couple of ideas on that myself, but I'm going to let you take this one.
Yeah, Rob, thank you for the question. Tom, thank you for the invite. And folks, thank you all for your time here. Here, the question is really about a fundamental utility. It's not just utilities, right? It's energy. Whether it's gas, whether it's electricity, that's energy. You're a utility company, National Grid, Eversource, whatever it might be. The reality is they deliver you something that they get from someplace. And there is a big story here, which always has to do with supply and demand. And if you think for a minute, sometimes we make energy policy a lot more complicated than we need to. There's a fundamental supply and demand thing that goes here. And here's what it is. Massachusetts, New England, take New England for a minute, because in a lot of ways, that's how we do power, especially here. So New England as a region, call it 15 million people spread out over maybe 35,000 square miles. Well, maybe a little bit more. What's your domestic energy source in New England? You don't have one. You don't have one. So densely populated, rich, comparatively speaking to other regions of the country. Those two things are going to make you big demanders of energy supply. The problem being you have to bring that supply from someplace else. That's basically the fundamental. That's my excuse as to why energy, to some extent, is always going to be probably more expensive here than it might be elsewhere. Now, my buddy John Hurst, it's funny, when we started this coalition, I had bumped his folks who worked on Beacon Hill. John and I had crossed paths a couple of times, but it's really been almost since around the time of COVID, and ironically, the energy constraint that we really have now has very little to do with it. That we started talking an awful lot, and a lot of that is impacts coming into Billy, what can we do about this kind of thing, and really kind of understand what's driving us. Here's the biggest mistake, if you would, that has been made with respect to that supply issue that I just went over. You've all heard about the need to decarbonize. You've We've all heard about the importance of green power and all of that kind of stuff. And I want to make something very clear. That's all good stuff. I'm not here to bash green energy or anything like that. I'm here to sort of say it's not nearly as feasible as fast as we thought it would be. And that's kind of what happened. And in the drive and the zeal that has dominated a lot of policy making in Massachusetts since, ironically, around the time of COVID, really started just before that. The assumption was that this new supply would be here, that this new wind power would be here, that this new hydropower would be here, that this new storage capacity would be here. Some of us, as we listened to that, were like, well, it may take a little bit longer than you think, and leave yourself an out. What if it's not? Be careful of mandates that say you have to rely on this even if it isn't going to be here. And folks, that's kind of what's going on, is we're getting our energy primarily from certain sources, a lot of them fossil fuel based. But they were real, they are real, and they were reliable, and relatively speaking, affordable. Not saying they're cheap, not saying they were ever cheap. You've never really had low utility bills here in the Commonwealth, and I'm going to be honest with you, you never really will. But what really caused the folks that John hears from every day to, what the hell happened here? What happened is, the wind didn't come as fast as we thought it would. The storage isn't here at all. Maine, New Hampshire said, why are we running hydropower lines through our states to help Boston and Massachusetts when they're not sending us anything? Again, by the way, logical questions, the answers of which were always going to take a lot more time than anybody thought. So that's really what's gone on here, is that we strangulated, in many ways, the supply that we had, thinking we would be off of it before we are, and now we're reconciling with, wow, we really need to give ourselves more time. So we can talk more about what we think we can do about this, but that's really what the answer is. We have really, really exacerbated what were constraints on us.
So, quick show of hands before I get back to our panelists. How many of you did not have your business prior to COVID? So everybody was in business before COVID? Okay. So, one of the things I talk about when I talk to the industries that I get to go visit with is, for us, it was a reality, right? Like, we were shut down.
Yeah.
We still had to write the check for the rent and the power. I had an office in Braintree. I had to pay that rent even though I wasn't going. I had to pay the electricity. And I think that's one of the things that's really hard for the public to be able to understand about why our costs are up and everything else, is because of the fact that we had to, in my case, I had to pivot. That's a whole other seminar that we could do some other time, Tom. But we had to get creative. And unless you were an essential worker, you couldn't do business. And that was hard. So thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. We're going to jump back over and since we're talking about supply chains and things like that, we all remember that, right? Running around trying to find toilet paper. Yeah? Julie, how have recent supply chain challenges affected healthcare?
Thank you. I'll give an example and just talk a little bit about what we've done from a supply chain procurement perspective at Brown Health. So over this last year, and many of you may have heard of this, we had significant shortages in a product for dialysis patients. And critical to treat, if patients don't receive dialysis, they subsequently pass away. And so through emergency preparedness and many people within the hospital, we had to become nimble, we had to be able to work together and identify solutions so that we could make sure that patients were receiving what they needed to get their dialysis treatments. It wasn't easy. It took several people from pharmacy to frontline staff to leadership to say, how do we work together and how do we get these supplies for patients so that their dialysis is able to work. position. There were daily calls across the country, the people who need emergency preparedness. Literally every day we're brainstorming on how we're being able to provide this to our patients. It ended up being that we all worked together. We were able to get what we needed to take care of patients, but throughout that time it was daily calls, the challenges that we were facing, the shortage, patients calling concerned they weren't able to receive treatment. For us, we were able to pull together as a team, work with partners in Massachusetts to be able to say, all right, what are we doing across New England and across the country to be able to get those supplies that we need. So we were fortunate enough to work together, go right into sort of that recovery mode to say what do we have to do. And that's happened with other supplies as well, not just dialysis products, but we've had shortages with other saline bags and drugs. You see shortages with drugs across the country as well. And we have a very robust pharmacy team that's able to partner with us so that we haven't had to impact patient care. But on the larger scale for Brown Health, from a procurement perspective, the folks who lead procurement, we realized that we had a lot of opportunities, say, we talked a little bit about widgets earlier when we were talking, how can we really lean in to be more efficient? Like, what are they using in cardiology? What are they using in cancer? When we started to lift the hood, we were like, wow, we have a lot of products and it's not the most efficient way to do business. It's from a cost perspective, it wasn't efficient, and from a patient care perspective, it wasn't efficient. So we've really gone through this journey, and we're still going through it to say, what are we using across the system? What guardrails do we have in place so we can make sure that we're allowing the supply chain to do the work they need to do with the vendors and the contracts to get the essentially the supplies that we need. And it took a lot of compromise with providers and teams to say, for example, I've used that product for 30 years or more. How dare you tell me that I can't use that anymore? But then we were able to show the data, show the efficacy of the product, show that patient care continue. We still have great outcomes. That's been something that we've been able to do at Brown Health.
Thank you. So, again, bouncing around all over the place. I want to keep different topics in the air so that you get the benefit of this whole thing. Lisa, I want to bounce back to you for a minute. And you talked about supply chain and pipeline. It's something I'm dealing with right now myself. Anybody trying to hire somebody right now? Anybody? I had somebody who came to the first event I hired them for, showed up for work, stayed 2 hours, said she was going to the ladies' room, and left. Read my lips. At somebody's wedding. Okay? So, Lisa, and you know what? If you're trying to hire right now, there's a big pool of people, but how do you really get that out? How do you build a pipeline, Lisa, instead of always hiring reactively? I mean, that's one of the things I think we run into is we've got full rosters, and the next thing you know, somebody's off looking, they get that better opportunity. How do you make it so that it's a consistent pipeline? Because I'm dealing with it right now, and I gotta be honest with you, I'm pulling what's left of my hair out to figure this out.
I don't see a lot of hair. So, in my mind, and throughout my career, and there are companies I've worked for before I owned South Shore Staffing, we always had the mentality, and I think every small business owner should have this mentality, always be hiring. Even for myself, I own a small staffing company. I am always thinking, always be hiring. That whether it's a new recruiter, a new salesperson. Number one, you don't know what could happen tomorrow. My biggest and best, most productive recruiter is here, and God forbid something were to happen to her tomorrow, it would be a significant loss for me and my company. And everyone should have that mindset. So always be hiring is a way to live. What that means is reaching out to your network. Always staying on top of your network, your friends, your family, referrals, candidates that maybe you passed up the last time you were hiring because there was one person that was a little bit better than that person. Always keep those relationships intact. Go back years to people that maybe you worked with or that did work for you years ago, but left for whatever reason. Maybe they, if it wasn't a bad reason, maybe they would be an essential person to bring back. So always having that mentality, who can I hire? Who would be good for us? The network. the people you know, the job boards, the colleges, your own alumni associations, your kids' alumni associations, your kids' friends, your own friends and their relatives. So it's just always having that pipeline of people for different roles. Just, that's my advice, like always be hiring, having that mindset, always be hiring.
I always push this out when I talk to organizations about networking. And that has always been networking. But the bigger thing is, I think we oftentimes overlook the fact when we show up at a networking event like a chamber event. And when's the next chamber networking event, Tom? Shameless plug time?
Yeah, just December, I think, 2nd.
Okay.
Networking breakfast.
Oh.
Another one, it's just on
Okay.
breakfast.
All right. But we go in because we're looking to make a connection, right, Beth? And see how many people Beth knows that might be able to be a good referral for them. If you listen to the radio a little bit more now, radio stations are getting creative because they're doing things like they're doing live remote broadcasts at open houses for realtors to get people to come to open houses. And they're actually trying to push now and offer you, instead of you promoting what you do, promote who you're looking for. It's kind of creative, but you bring up a good point that networking can really be a good opportunity for that. So,
Networking is huge, and the other thing, I mean, I think as a rule, we sort of live our lives reactively instead of proactively. It's human nature. So when you have a significant loss or someone, you know, even if it's someone going out on medical leave, you know, you have that short-term coverage that you need to fill because it's a significant loss, we react. Or as business owners, we react instead of thinking proactively. So I think, you know, that's always good. And again, that goes back to having the mindset, always be hiring.
so Bill, we're going to jump back to you for a minute because, you know, we're talking about...
Get it back so fast.
Listen, I'm just keeping things moving and trying to keep the... I like that capital plates, right? You know, we're talking about supplies and supply chain. We talked a little bit about supplies in healthcare and supplies in our HR stuff. But what about clean power? How do you bring large amounts of clean power into Massachusetts?
Yeah, the proactive, reactive thing might come into play a little bit in this as well. Look, again, you, New England, Massachusetts, any energy you get is going to come from outside your borders. I'm certainly not here to bash the efforts to bring in clean power. There's a huge amount of merit to being able to say, hey, if we can have some, you know, significant windmill type of generation 15 miles off our coast or something like that, that's probably a good idea, you know, especially if essentially what that's going to be replacing is capacity that comes from, you know, pipelines in some cases 2,000 to 3,000 miles away, which is literally what we have. But here's the thing. On the sort of where we probably could have been a lot more proactive in looking at this, and look, I'll put myself in this bucket as much as anybody. Think for a minute. Windmills. Anybody ever seen a windmill that generates power out in the middle of the ocean? You know how big these things are? These things are the size of the Prudential. 750 feet. So, proactive. We've been thinking about, all right, we're going to put 700 Prudentials in Nantucket Sound in 3.5 years? I don't care if you're Jesus Christ. It's probably, maybe that's going to take a little bit longer, right? Type of thing. Now, I'm being a little bit glib on this, and I apologize if I am. But that was just never realistic. John Hurst and I can sit here now thinking about it and understanding, wow, you know, at the time, we would have been the skunks of the lawn party when everybody was excited about all of this stuff coming on. We're going to manufacture this stuff down in Bedford and Salem and all of that kind of thing. But there also would have been nothing wrong with saying, folks, do our timelines really make sense with this? shouldn't we be setting up mandates in the Commonwealth that say 50% of the electricity you use is going to come from this windmill out there, if it isn't even going to be ready by 2030? And that's the kind of stuff that we did. So, fully answering your question, Ron, I don't knock the effort to try. And by the way, I have, as John knows, I have huge issues with the extreme left on the, I'm a Democrat, by the way, so I'm not here to knock Democrats or anything like that, but I have huge issues with the far left that would never even listen to the idea that this stuff couldn't be ready by 2030, just as I have huge issues with Donald Trump saying windmills are bad because he doesn't like them. I mean, this is all insanity. So what has to really happen with this kind of stuff is we've got to get back to the reality-based world in this and allow ourselves to say that there is nothing wrong with relying upon and sustaining the energy footprint that has got you this far. That needs to carry us a little bit longer to give this other stuff a lot more time to actually develop and economize. This is the other thing I think that gets left out with green power, Rob, sometimes. Remember, you're scaling it up from nothing. What happens with anything as time goes on and you scale? The incremental costs go down. Your economies of scale kick in. Those are the mistakes that I think have really been made with this. And in fairness, I think you might agree a little bit. I think we're finally starting to get attention on this. There's sort of this acknowledgement, and certainly the Healy administration comes at this from the left. There's no question about that. But to the governor's credit, you may have seen, she actually supports this recent expansion of natural gas coming into the air, which we desperately need. We're going to need more than just that. But I will tell you, as a political matter, 2 years ago, you never would have seen something like that happen. So we have a ways to go here, and certainly, wind power long term. Nothing wrong with saying, let's make this more realistic. Maybe this is a 2040, 2050 type of thing. That's okay to do that type of thing. But in the meantime, we're going to need a lot more of what we've had in the past that you're still using an awful lot of at this point.
We're going to keep our conversation going, talking more about some proactive stuff for a few minutes, and then I'm going to give you all an opportunity to breathe a little bit, and our panelists to be able to take a sip. But Christina, I want to bounce back to you for a minute and talk a little bit about what I would consider to be a proactive approach to business, and that is about strategies local businesses can use to mitigate the effects, of tariffs.
Right, so again, if you think about tariffs, these are costs that as the small business owner, you're gonna bear first. Can you pass it on? Maybe, maybe not. There's a limit to what you might be able to do there. So what do you do in this situation? And so depending on the kind of business that you're running, whether you're bringing in raw materials and you assemble something, right? Can you get those materials from another place? Could you fundamentally redesign your product? That's a huge ask on any business, right? I had some friends, I work in a large organization. I had some friends who ran small businesses, and COVID hit, and I watched them pivot on a dime, and it was absolutely impressive. But to be asked to do that again and again and again is exhausting. It depletes the resources that you have, your personal energy, just the commitment that it takes to keep going. It's like really tough. So some of the things that you can do are look at scaling back, right? That's one thing. You look at where you source from or who you source from. And you can also look at how you source. There are some really interesting sort of tax-free zones that you land your items in a warehouse and you can avoid some tariffs in the way that they're distributed. There's some really, really creative folks in the supply chain space who are coming up with some solutions. I'll tell you from personal experience, what I ordered is a barge at a time.
Hold on, a barge?
A barge.
Barge.
A whole barge full
Okay,
of.
I just want to make sure I heard
Yeah,
you correctly.
yeah. I order a barge of flux, which is a byproduct from oil refining from Canada. One of those barges was in a 32-hour window where the tariff was imposed and was incredibly high and cost more than $500,000, just the tariff. There aren't a lot of places that I can go to for barges of flux. But I have to start looking, right? I have to start asking those questions. I have to start getting people on my team involved. Now, when you are a small business and you might be a team of 1 and you might be a team of 5 and you might be a team of 10, again, I have energy to do so many things. And which things am I going to do? So there really does become a balancing act between the effort and the reward. And that's where we see a lot of costs just get passed along, right? And kind of snowballs into the effects in the larger economy. But that's certainly one thing that you can do. Is there a domestic source? And I think what we're seeing from a lot of these tariffs is we may want there to be a domestic source. And to your point, right, that takes a lot of time, an awful lot of time, especially if you want those sources to be large-scale manufacturers. Just site selection often takes 2 to 3 years before you know where you think you might want to build something, much less getting the thing permitted and built. But look for those domestic sources. Look for sourcing out of places that have not had the tariff inflicted on them. There's not a lot of that left, though, let's just be honest. But the other thing to do is to think about a rationalization of the product line that you're offering. Is it time to switch up the mix of the products that you're offering if you're selling a good? That is an option. Again, those have very real and material impacts on your business. And so we need a lot of thought going into those. And then the other thing is can you modify what you're doing? Not a full-blown pivot, but a modification of what you're offering. Is there a tweak that you can make? Is there maybe a reduction in features that would pull out one component that's especially impacted? Some of those innovations, we often think that innovation is brand new, never seen before, and it's really not. Innovation is just anything that is different than before that you can monetize. And so that's probably another way to really think about it is how do I innovate my business model? How do I innovate this product? And it can be a temporary innovation until this uncertainty around how long tariffs might last can be alleviated. But those are kind of the levers that you have to pull. But it does take some soul searching to understand how much energy should I expend for the reward that might be there.
It's funny how this all gets connected, but my bigger question, I have a quick follow-up though, just something I'm looking at, something I experienced, creative partnerships with your competitors. You all share the same supplier or need for something. It's easier to split something that you've got to pay for one time 3 ways instead of paying for it just once. Is that an effective solution in your experience?
I have seen that work in other industries, yes.
We do it all the time. In the DJ world, we buy, you talk about a barge.
Yeah.
We talk about one of those big shipping containers full of those little light up styrofoam things that we hand out at everybody in the world these days. And, it's tariffs, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And, I'm just thinking outside the boxes. you know, in certain industries that might work.
Sort of collective buying agreements. I think certainly, you know, I've seen that work really well with, again, in manufacturing spaces where there's a large capital hurdle to get into the business to begin with. That you talk about sharing a space, or you sort of, almost like a timeshare. You timeshare that piece of equipment, or you timeshare a space. So those things can certainly work. I will add that in my own personal experience, I've seen that more successful when it's a partnership between a customer and a supplier than competitors. But I live in a very different space.
Yeah, of course. I mean, some of the spaces, you know, I'm fortunate to be in the entertainment industry where we all sing Kumbaya some days. But there are some days that, you know, you lose a job to a competitor, and you know you want to, you know, have a hit done on them. You know what I mean? But that's pretty neat. Something that we can't split up though, John, are those pesky swipe fees.
Yep.
They're killing me. If you're a store, or restaurant, or other consumer serving business, you got to take credit cards these days. I mean, I'm leaving on a cruise tomorrow, and they're already asking me for my credit card. I haven't even gotten on the boat yet. I've paid for the cruise. I've got the patent, the tips, just all that stuff. They're like, it's all electronic these days. Is there anything that state government can do, John, to give us some relief on these swipe fees? They're brutal.
Well, right, you know, it's a great question. It can best be done in Congress. You know, Visa and MasterCards, the banks really, for the most part, operate under federal law, interstate banking laws. So, and there is legislation that we're all supporting to try to rein these in, put some, a little more, create more competition. We really have really a monopoly, essentially, a duopoly, Visa and MasterCard. And you know, and if you don't really have competition, you know, you need regulation in any marketplace, right? In order to really protect the consumer. So it's mostly a federal issue. One of the things that the state can do is that we have a law that goes back to the 70s that actually prohibits stores and restaurants from surcharging. Surcharging is if you go into, and you know, if you do any traveling at all, you probably see this a lot in some full-service restaurants in other states. Unfortunately, you might see it in Massachusetts, but they're frankly breaking the law. That's one of the reasons why we got to fix this. Surcharging is if you go into a restaurant and you know you're paying by credit card, and at the end they put on a credit card fee, right? To essentially have the customer pay it as opposed to the company. By the way, you know, in 47 states where they're illegal, the consumers do not, by and large, are fine with it, right? It's kind of like you have it down there with the tip and with the sales tax and so forth. They're fine with it, but in Massachusetts, you technically can't do it. And so, you know, that's one area of relief that the state could grant to these. You're not gonna see a big national chain restaurant do it. You know, frankly, they get a lower interchange swipe fees. The big guys get, you know, they can negotiate these swipe fees down. It's really the small businesses that really get hammered by this. You know, this big national firm, you know, maybe they can keep theirs under 2%, where a mom and pop, it's over 4%, right? It's a huge difference. So it's really relief that would be almost exclusively for small businesses. You wouldn't see it as much in a store because you almost would have to have like two prices, a cash price and a plastic or credit price. But you know, some might do. But you know, it is something that we've got to find a way to better regulate it at the federal level and give some cost relief at the state level through surcharging.
I'm going to address the elephant in the room, and it's totally off script, John, and I'm sure some of us are thinking about it. How do the gas stations get away with it?
Well, yeah, you know, not who. Well, number one, they get away with it because they have a cash discount. You can do a cash discount. You just can't do a surcharge. A
So they're being
plastic-
creative with it, is what you're
They
saying.
get creative with
Right.
it. You know,
And
so
I-
pay at the pump, a cash discount, you can do that, and you have a price which is for credit, right? But then you get another 5 cents off if you pay cash, right? You can do that. That's a difficult thing to do if you're a restaurant or a store.
Oh, of course.
You know, right? Here's the price. The price is the price. Oh, we're going to give you 5. You know.
There were some
5 cents.
restaurants that do
But
it.
some, yeah, there are some that do it. I've seen it down in New York City some. So it is an option. It's simpler, you know, as far as your pricing if you could just do a surcharge at the end. Yeah, no, it's a good point. But the other point on the surcharging thing is that it only affects commercial establishments. Totally exempt is government. You know, government surcharges all the time if you pay for something on a credit card. Hospitals do, universities do, nonprofits do. You know, all of them technically can surcharge on a credit card charge. A commercial establishment, which is basically a school or a restaurant or service provider, they technically.
I'm going to do one thing real quick just to make sure everybody's still with us. We're doing all right? Hamlet, how we doing?
Good.
Do me a favor, everybody stand up real quick. I'm not going to make you do the YMCA. We're not equipped for that, but do me a favor really quick. Let's just make a little movement. Doesn't matter what you're doing. So I was at an event the other day, and they were introducing a guest of honor who's being honored for something, and the person introducing them was like Ben Stein from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So I want to make sure we don't fall into that loophole. You're all doing a hell of a job, by the way. Can we please give our panelists a big We're not doing any of that, but you know what? I want to just make sure we keep everybody circulating so we can be more receptive. Have a seat. So Julie, we're going to talk about, we keep talking about stuff that costs us money. But you know what? This is good stuff. So Julie, health insurance costs are still going up for small businesses. What are the factors behind it?
That's a great question, and
I'm glad you think so.
so I won't go with factors. I think I'll talk a little bit about the why and then what I think we can do some of that.
Perfect, because that was the follow-up question I had for you. That's perfect.
I think everybody knows healthcare across the country is a challenge. We live in the Northeast, so we're a little bit, access is a little bit easier for us. We're able to get to the doctor's office, the hospital. For some folks, they're not able to do that, right? So we're already, in a better place in the Northeast. I think that in general, healthcare, we can do a better job with, preventative, so making sure people are going to get their preventative testing done, wellness, around wellness in general for people. Mental health is very much, continues to be a number one cause for people being out on leave and not able to go to work every day. Talking about time off, making sure that people are getting the time off that they need, so when they come to work, they're productive and want to be part of a team. And every aspect of work is hard. That's why it's called work. But when you're doing 12-hour shifts, or you're doing 60 hours in a healthcare setting, and patients are sick, there tends to be that creep up of people are sick and themselves are sick and can't come to work because they're burnt out and they're tired. So I think it's sort of two different swim lanes, right? Like I think we need to make sure that the why is always the patients of why we're trying to do this, whether you're a small business or a hospital that's nonprofit that has 15,000 employees. I think that's always the first thing that you have to think about. But I think that really having those conversations and making sure we're educating consumers around the preventative, the wellness, not going to an emergency room, finding primary care for people. We know that there's a lack of primary care, in Rhode Island, Massachusetts. I say this all the time. I'll put Massachusetts in this now. We are small and mighty. We should have healthcare on lockdown. Like nobody should have to want to see a doctor and have to call a friend because they can't get in to see an endocrinologist. So that's sort of what excites me about how we can be better in that space, but those are just a small, for me, low-hanging fruit that I think we can all advocate around preventative and wellness.
So, John, I'm going to bring you into this discussion a little bit because, you know, health insurance costs do impact, and in some cases hurt small employers. How do we fix the cost, this cost problem?
Well, there's two major issues. One is the size of the pie, right? The pie affects all of us, whether you work for a small business, a large business, whether you're a taxpayer or not. How big is that pie, and how is it regulated, or how is the marketplace? Is it competitive enough? And how is that pie divided up? In my judgment, the pie's growing way too fast. And part of that is, it's kind of like the banks, you know, you got to either have to have real regulation, or you have to have real competition. And in healthcare, we have neither. And if you have neither, again, the consumer is not really protected. And so you either have a competitive marketplace where you have strong transparency in cost and quality, and consumers, you know, can see where they should go for a certain procedure, and you know, and frankly, the pricing of what they're paying either out of pocket or on their premiums based upon where they go, you know, should have an impact, right? Right now, it doesn't really have an impact. Now, the other thing is, you know, frankly, I have no problem if a Brown wants to create, you know, open up shiny new facilities. Same thing up in Boston, Mass General, Corrigan. If they want to open up new facilities, and the customer wants to go there, consumer wants to go there and have their procedures there, fine. I'm perfectly fine with that. But the thing that never happens in healthcare, it's very, very frustrating, is that unlike a store or a restaurant, if you have a new competitor coming in across the street, someone either has to lower the prices or someone closes, right? That never happens in healthcare. Nobody ever closes. I mean, you look at what happened with Stewart. A hospital chain that really was not viable economically, was not getting the patient level. They went under, yet those facilities, you know, the taxpayer picked up the cost. And that's where the intersection with politics enters. You know, usually, for whatever reason, political leaders will not allow, you know, any of these healthcare facilities to ever close. You know, even if the taxpayers have to bail it out to the tune of billions of dollars. And even if you really don't, even if your population is flat or declining, and even if you don't have enough nurses or doctors to staff all these new facilities and all the old ones that are underutilized, you know, what do you end up with? You end up with too much money going into this big pot that's understaffed and underutilized. So that's part of it. We got to deal with that, you know. And so you either have to regulate, you know, the acquisitions and the new facilities, and get the politicians to not listen to, frankly, maybe a healthcare union or somebody else and say, you know, you can't close this facility. You got to allow that to happen. The other thing that you have to do is that you got to fix it for small businesses. Small businesses really are second-class consumers under the law, particularly in Massachusetts. They're in a risk pool that they are forced, going back 20 years under the old Romney Care, which was the model for the ACA. They're forced to unfairly cross-subsidize individuals who now, by the way, most individuals also get tax subsidies. You've seen all the debate down in Washington and triggered the shutdown and all of that. You know, individuals get these tax subsidies, which, by the way, are not even available to small businesses and their employees, right? Yet small businesses are in that same risk pool, paying higher premiums, so those very same individuals can have lower premiums on top of tax subsidies. That is a borderline scandal, let alone just pure unfair public policy scandal. And then the elected officials just pile on. There was a study that came out last week. There are 57 state mandates in Massachusetts, state healthcare mandates that apply to fully insured consumers. Fully insured are folks that primarily work for small businesses or are getting their insurance through government, whether it be the connector or the GIC, they work for government. Virtually everybody else is what's called self-insured. Self-insured are larger employers that, and as costs keep going up, more and more businesses are self-insuring, right on down to maybe 10 employees. If you're self-insured, you don't operate under Massachusetts law. You operate under the federal law, the ACA, under what's called the essential benefits. You can ignore these 57 state mandates, which the study that came out last week, it showed that for a typical small business, these 57 state mandates amount to 24% of their premium. 24%. So if you're a small business who, if you don't have a high deductible plan today, you have a more old style plan with low deductibles, low co-pays. Today a family policy in Massachusetts is 40 grand or higher. 40 grand for a family policy, and run the math, the state mandates, 10 grand of that are state mandates that you could avoid if you weren't operating under the Massachusetts law. That is a scandal. It's public policy malfeasance that, from elected officials that don't pay for their own premiums, don't understand what's going on, and they just keep piling on to small businesses and their employees. It is creating such levels of anger and frankly, pressure on small businesses that, some of them are taking steps that they probably shouldn't. 5 or 10 employees going full insurance or going self-insurance.
So John, as a small business owner in Massachusetts, and we know that small businesses make up the majority of our country, how do we change that? I mean, it sounds like it should be a simple change, and we have the power because we are the biggest group of taxpayers. Why is this? Why are we experiencing this in this?
Well, I can tell you, it's our primary. Next year's an election year. It is my organization that has 4,000 members. 99% small businesses. It's our primary message, and we're going to do paid ads aimed at politicians. I mean, you got to pressure them and tell them whether some of them don't even know they're doing it. Others do know, but maybe because they don't have to pay, they're not on the same playing field. They don't care. Right? Their health insurance is paid by the taxpayers, just like their utility costs for their staffs and their offices are paid for by the taxpayers. What we're going to focus on, frankly, are these state mandates, which disproportionately hit small businesses, and it's all health insurance and it's utilities. I mean, so it's 4% mandates on health insurance. I don't know, Bill would know better than me, but I think for a typical small business or a residential customer on electricity and gas, it's probably more than that percentage-wise. Their bill is a state mandate. So transparency on bad public policy that's disproportionately hitting our small businesses and their customers is really our mission going forward. And we really need, frankly, all the chambers of commerce and others to really join us on that mission.
Yeah, you hinted at that, and I want to jump over to Bill for a follow-up question. How do we bring in sustainable energy costs?
Yeah. So I'm going to, this is a really good segue into everything.
I've done that for 38 years.
No, it was good, and this word mandate it comes up a lot. You heard me refer to it, earlier on in this. So I went through with you the fundamental sort of supply and demand issue that exists, and the geographical disadvantage that we have with that. But the fact that we're working on increased supply in the conventional natural gas space is a good thing, and I think that will bring some relief probably a few years out. On the other piece of your bill, if you ever wanted to really look at it, depending upon what your percentage is roughly of use between gas and electric, somewhere between probably 18 and 34% of that bill ties back to some type of state mandate that's out there. One of the big things that we're going to work on, that the coalition that we run, that John's a member of, the Tom, that your chamber is a member of, so you'll know about this when the time comes, is folks, since we aren't going to hit these mandates anyway, push them back. The first mandate that we have is 2030. This is a mandate that says by 2030, half of the power that you used will have come from green sources. That's not going to happen. The people who wrote that and still talk about it as something that they love, acknowledge it's not going to happen. But here's the problem. The piece of your bill that is not related to supply, that is not related directly to distribution, it is related to providing the revenue that funds this transition, is all geared toward satisfying this 2030 mandate, and then 2040, and then 2050. So the first thing that we need to do with this is, since you're not going to hit 2030 anyway, let's stop the amount of revenue we're collecting to hit a 2030 mandate that is not achievable. What is that revenue going for? That is what you hear. You're going to get talked about these different electric rates and gas rates for certain types of consumers, the rebates for heat pumps and all of that kind of stuff. That's what all of that stuff is going to. And it's all geared towards satisfying a 50% net zero requirement that is mathematically impossible to satisfy. So our coalition is working on that. We think we have an awful lot of traction in the House to move this. I'm not going to lie to you folks, and I'm probably going to get myself in trouble here. Most of your bad energy policy in this Commonwealth comes from the state Senate. That's, you know, I have a lot of friends.
But it's an election year, right?
Yeah. Well, there's one in particular who runs energy policy for the Senate who you know, is very tone deaf on this stuff, for lack of a better way to put it. But going to Rob, what you just said is, we expect either before or probably right after the holidays, the House will move on trying to do something about mandates. So when Tom reaches out to you to say, tell your legislator this is a good idea, it's up for a vote, please follow his lead. Believe it or not, we don't think this is the kind of thing that you actually need to just go up there and take the hill and get all that kind of mad. The simple call, the simple email to the legislator that says you have an opportunity to do something about this now, we think that could be very persuasive. And it would be very important that after it leaves the House, the Senate feels pressure on this. So the real answer to your question is the long term and the short term. The long term vote, that needs more supply. We're going to have to expand gas pipelines. We're working on it. We're working on that. That's coming, but that's going to take a few years. The short term can be, you're not hitting 2030, let's stop paying for it. That's what's bugging me about this. That's really, I'm going to get virtuous like John and angry. It would be one thing if you could hit this mandate. I might not agree, but I could at least respect that's a policy choice. If more people feel that's more important, fine. You can't hit it, but you're paying to hit it. Stupid.
Thank you. So we're going to wrap up on a high note. We're going to talk about growing, right? Like job growth and everything else. And we've got a few more minutes left before we're done. So Christine, we're coming back to you. How do tariffs influence job growth and business development within small economies or local economies?
We touched on this a little bit, right? So if you think about what the tariffs do, there's really two sides to that coin. One is what we've talked on, where they raise our cost and they put some business at risk. The other side of that is when tariffs are used like a scalpel and they're put in place in a way that protects a growing, a blossoming kind of industry, right? And it protects and it nurtures and it allows that growth to happen. That is where you get a groundswell. and you see investment, and you see development, and you see partnerships forming, you see growth, you see expansions happen. That's where you see job growth, right? But again, it's timing,
Yeah.
right? And you have to be very honest with yourself about how long it takes to develop an industry, to develop a small business, to develop all of those things that we send them out of the country a long time ago. We want those back here, right? We want to supply ourselves, and in order to do that, we have to have the workforce, and we have to have the land, and we have to have the permitting in place, and we have to have just the want to. So when there are great stories, there are great examples in the past that you can look at where whole industries benefited and grew up and are very successful across the country today. We've got to get out of this period of just uncertainty, right? We don't know what's happening from Tuesday to Friday right now. You can't plan, and you certainly can't plan a project that's going to take 3 to 4 years to execute. That's the world I live in. It's 3 or 4 years, and then you break ground. And then where does the stuff to build this new place come from? Is it that place that's still got a big tariff? So we're a little out of balance at the moment, right? When, though, exacted in the right way, or I like to say with a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer, you can see tremendous job growth. You can see tremendous innovation. You can see intellectual property get created that then helps to drive and protect those economies. So it's really two sides of the same coin. And I feel like at the moment the coin's flipping around in the air. And it just hasn't landed yet. We don't know where it's going to land quite yet. But it can absolutely be a real driver for nurturing some kind of budding industries. We've got to survive this period, and hopefully we'll get to that.
I think one of the things, and this will bring me over to Lisa and our final question for the evening. It's a little bit, and I can't speak for everybody in the room, but when we talk about growth, things happen in certain small businesses really, really fast because you hit that stride, right? But how can small businesses, Lisa, what can they do to showcase growth opportunities?
So I think for a lot of companies with few employees or less employees, when you have an employee or a candidate that you see some special skills, or you can offer them more training, mentorship, to nurture them so that they can grow and flourish. And then there may be a person that you hire after them, or they may be less skilled, that sees, that learns. Another thing I like to talk about in social staffing, we learn through osmosis. And in a small, very small boutique company, we have a combined experience of 50 years, but we have some people that have 2 or 3 or 5 years experience, and then we have some employees that have 35 years of experience. So I tell everybody we learn through osmosis, and that might be, a younger person or a less experienced person learning from a more experienced person. And I think that helps, that mentorship, that nurturing, giving people an opportunity to learn new skills, the skills that they may not have had, or as a leader, seeing the potential in someone or a skill set in someone that they weren't hired for, that they didn't even see themselves. So I think, hiring from within, growing from within, learning through osmosis, and this goes back to a national level, or even in the energy department, where, why aren't we using the energy in our own country? Why do we have to go elsewhere? Same with goods and products. So I think hiring from within, looking at your own people, can grow
You
and.
talk about mentorship, and I think we can kind of maybe we're going to close at this point because I'm looking at the clock and going, we're just about there. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do any questions. If you do have a specific question for our panelists, I'm sure that they would welcome an email or a phone call. But I think that's one of the things. I'm sorry?
What did you want to?
I don't know if we have time, do we?
He's the boss.
Technically is. Oh, time granted?
Yeah.
All right. I'll finish my thought and we'll throw two out there. There are organizations out there that do offer mentorship opportunities. I think that some of the best people I hired were people that came up to me and said, I want to learn how to do that. And they were willing to come out on a Friday or Saturday night for $50 and schlep gear and lift gear and stand there in a suit and tie and watch me work and ask questions. And, you know, in the middle of spinning from Celebration to We Are Family isn't the right time to really ask me why I'm doing it this way. But, you know, if you really look at trying to build your talent pool a little bit, there is success out there with, you can do it yourself. There are organizations, I can speak for the organization I work with during the day. Scouting America has an exploring program that does that stuff. So, and it's been proven throughout the firehouses that we service, they bring in kids who want to go into fire service, and now it's beginning to help with them filling those new positions. So, I just wanted to bring that into the conversation. I want to thank our panelists, but this is your opportunity. I'm going to take two. Who has a question for one of our panelists that you'd like to bring on up? Go ahead. Hi, Beth. How are you? Good. Go ahead. Speak up just a little bit so we can all get it.
So one thing that wasn't mentioned here is childcare or flexibility. So how do you feel that we can improve everyone being able to participate in this economy, especially people that have childcare needs?
Can I?
Well, I would just say, look, childcare is very important. But just so happens we got approached today by a chain of really there are a bunch of small businesses that are put together and that offer childcare. You know, they want us to promote their services to our members at affordable prices. But you know, I've talked to a lot of childcare companies, and you know, most of them are small businesses, right? Most of the small businesses. They have the very same challenges as the local store, restaurant, and other small businesses do as well. Same cost challenges, same staffing challenges. We need to lower the cost for them to operate. You know, to the daycare and preschool operator that I've talked to, and I know I've talked to the Healy administration and their education department. The number one thing that they hear about, from those operations, is the cost of their health insurance. So there are things that we can do to help out to make childcare more affordable and available. If we just help out small businesses and others, they are small businesses as well. Make it more affordable for them to employ people and to serve their customers, because that's who we are. We're customers that have children that need to be cared for. And we have to be able to afford it, and they have to be able to run a profitable small business.
Makes sense.
If I could add to that, from an employer's perspective, if you are an employer looking to hire people and you know that childcare is an important issue for this particular future employee, flexibility is key. Even nowadays, flexibility with dads is key. As a small business owner that employs men and women that have children, I have to understand that they have childcare issues come up, or whatever it might be. A child is sick. You have to just have a flexible mindset and attitude, especially if you value the employee and you want to retain them and you want them to grow and you want them to help grow your business. So flexibility is key, and that's really a newer mindset, you know, probably more so since COVID, because when we got sent home, we realized that we can operate with technology. We're all forced to do it, and we know that we can. So having the flexibility, having a flexible mindset about childcare with your employees or your future employees is huge if you want to retain them and you want to grow your business.
Jump in on this one too, if I
Sure.
can, Christina.
Please, go ahead.
Again, I operate in a very different space. I run a 24/7 factory. How in the world does that second shift, 3 to 11 person manage being a parent? Right? Those are very real concerns. But I can't not run those hours, right? So I think too, when you're having conversations with candidates and you know that there are just very real situations, transparency with those folks up front, absolute honesty about what are the requirements of this, what are the hours, those things can go an awful long way. You know, where you can, offer the flexibility. It's absolutely key. Just today, my operations manager had his 2 little boys there because his wife's sick and his mother-in-law's his caregiver and everybody's sick. I was like, and we do dangerous things. Bring them in, half a day, they have to stay in the office. You focus on this kind of work today, right? You made that work.
Yeah, that was the flexibility.
That's the flexibility,
I
right?
say
It doesn't
bring
always
it in.
mean work from home. Like, I run often into people who think flexibility equals remote work. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that. Shift the hours for a couple of days if that's something you can do. I had a couple of ladies, both of them needed, they were both expecting at the same time, and they wanted to cut back on hours. We turned it into a job share. Half a day this person, and half a day that person, or 2 days that person, 2 days that person. You've really got to get outside the box, but you can do some things. I'll tell you too, there are some really cool startups out there who are building apps, and it's almost like Uber for workers. So like if you run a big warehouse or you need 10 people on forklifts every day, right? They can sign up and they can go, oh, there's the shift I want. Boop. And then that's who is your workforce for the day. And they work a little bit like a temp agency, sort of, but not completely. But there's some really, really creative solutions that people are coming up with because this is just real. And we're all human, and we need some grace. We need to extend it. We need to be able to receive it.
You know, COVID really opened up a lot of the I guess you call it the gig work, or at least that's what I ran into. And I ran into it today. I interviewed somebody to replace that young woman that decided to leave the wedding. And I sat with him and in having a conversation, he said that he's looking for something with flexibility that isn't consistent, because he does that kind of a thing where he goes onto an app and he picks like Upwork is a good example of that. There are apps and organizations out there. My virtual assistant, if you call my office, nice woman named Jessica, she's in Louisiana, sweet as pie, gives you a little Southern hospitality, books the gig, and does all my work for me. And it's because of the fact that I was looking for something different, and with my line of business, I could have somebody that could do that at that point in time. But I'm seeing the shift on that as well, which is pretty neat. So,
COVID certainly put a lot of the
course.
child care facilities out of business. It was like, again, they're small businesses, and we got to rebuild that infrastructure.
any other questions out there for our panel tonight? Yes, sir.
I'd like to jump back to when you were talking about being proactive and reactive. One thing that I noticed, obviously in staffing and in the energy sector, when you are in a reactive situation, you kind of scramble to make a decision, make the right decision. you think that might be, and you make the right, you think you're making the right decision, but you're overseeing some of the things that might be right in front of you that could help you get to that right decision. So with the energy, we're not going to hit it by 2030. You think, obviously it sounded like, there's things that we already have at our disposal that we could be using, some resources that are right in front of us that we're not using or neglecting to use because we're pushing for something else.
Yeah, and 100%. And here's the reality to it is if it were as easy as you making the determination that I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do that, we wouldn't have a problem, right? Here's the problem. It's policymakers that make that determination for you. And the only way we're going to affect that is when that time comes to say, hey, this isn't going to happen. Stop making me pay for it. It really is that simple.
Can I follow up on that? Just a quick question on that. Why aren't we using factual studies that are coming out of this? Like you hear about like in California, they have brownouts and the governor issues a warning saying, hey, don't charge your electric cars because we have a brownout going on.
I'm going to try to give you the easiest answer I can on this, and this ties a little bit into what you were talking about, because here's what it really comes down to. If you have a lobby in this country and or this state, you're going to get some type of attention. And I'm going to be honest with you. It doesn't necessarily matter whether it's on the merits or not, okay? What has happened with energy policy in some ways is you hear about Sierra, you hear about CLF, you hear these, and again, I'm a Democrat, folks, I'm not here to bash all the left on everything, but these are ideologues. These are ideologues funded by some really deep pockets. Talk about the gig economy that's created just these millionaires and billionaires overnight, and in a lot of cases, climate became their, raison d'etre. That's what happened. So you have very enormous or well-capitalized lobbies that is pushing this really narrow agenda. You want to know something? They were really effective. So they were publishing studies that you could get all of this stuff done. It was all bullshit, but that's what happened. The folks that John and I work with, that bring you your energy, that bring you your gas a lot of times, you had to say to these guys, you got to get out there. Because you actually do have the facts, and we got to start telegraphing this. So I'm going to be honest, we're playing catch up. That's what happened. That's what happened.
I want to thank our panelists tonight. Can we please give them a big...
Thank you all. Great job. Really appreciate it. Rob, excellent work by you as well. Let's give Rob a hand too. And I also want to thank our sponsors again, Murphy, Hesse, Toomey, and Lehane, One Local Bank, and Rockland Trust. Thank you for your support. Appreciate that. Darren, thank you for our videography over there. Video. Chancellor in the back, thank you for having us and for the great food. And speaking of that, there is still more. Nobody has to leave. We're going to end the program, but you're welcome to stick around, network, have another drink, have a little bite to eat, and thank you all for being here.